So there's probably been one artist that over the course of my life has been with me through like every moment, you know, all the highs and lows and like seemingly everything in between. And that artist is, believe it or not, Alanis Morissette. And I remember being in high school, like I don't know if it was freshman year or sophomore year, when like Jagged Little Pill came out. And I remember that being, you know, all the rage. Like that was the like anthem album of that time. And I remember not being the biggest fan of it. And so it wasn't until her second album, Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie, came out, did I really start to kind of pay attention to Alanis's music. And it was interesting because I worked at Mann Theaters in Littleton, Colorado, and I was a projectionist, and we had Mann Radio, which was, you know, CD that would play in the lobby and the whole bit. And so part of being a projectionist was it was my job to, you know, set the radio. And I remember at that time, her big single was the song Thank You, which had the very famous, you know, music video, like, you know, where she's walking around naked and, you know, saying thank you and thank you for all of the good things and the bad things and just everything. And really it being about exposing yourself and being grateful and all of that. And I remember that song playing on Mann Radio, like on loop, like every single day. And you know, I didn't think much of it, but that album, because of that song, was something that I later picked up. And I listened to Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie a lot, like a lot. And shortly after the release of that album came the MTV Unplugged kind of concert of that album. And that is where I think I became like a full-fledged fan. And I loved that album. I love that album, and I still love that album to this day. And I remember, you know, there were some Bowie covers and some unreleased tracks and a song that she was going to do for the City of Angels soundtrack, which also happened to be a film that came out in our theater. And so it was just like this culmination of like Alanis Morissette in my life when things were going like really, really kind of good, at least when you're 16, 17 years old, you know, and you think things are like, you know, this is good. This is how it's supposed to be, you know. So it was a melancholy album. It was a bit of a do you know who I am kind of an album for her, and an apologetic sort of like it all got to my head. And so maybe that's why, you know, in my teenage years, like I was so like into that album, you know, because in a weird way I was, you know, big man on campus or something, and you know, you kind of have this brazen quality to you, and I guess I didn't possess the knowledge or the emotional depth of that time to realize that she was apologizing, that she was talking about how she had grown up, you know. So lyrics like, you know, dude, I could buy this place and sell it, so kiss it. You know, I'm sitting there going, yeah, I could buy this place, you know, I'm gonna run this place, and not realizing that she's very apologetic about having that attitude. So I guess in a weird way, I completely missed the boat on what the album meant, but nevertheless, it spoke to me. And so this was kind of a good time, you know, an up moment, you know. And then of course that the stuff with Columbine happened, and as a result, like all of that energy, all of that high, good feeling, you know, just kind of overnight, like obviously just disappeared. And I remember the night that happened, or, you know, because we were all like herded into an elementary school gymnasium while they accounted for, you know, who was alive and who was dead. And when we were released, I remember I walked to work. You know, the mall wasn't that far from the high school. And I walked to work, and I had keys. I let myself in. Or no, I didn't leave myself. There were people still closing. And I remember being in the lobby and like getting my first like drink in hours. And I'm sitting there like with our free cups, you know, with our free employee cups, just getting Coke out of the machine. And yeah, on the radio, on the man radio, there's that song, you know, Thank You, playing. And I remember at the time, like, it was ironic, which is another one of her songs, ironic and weird, but at the same time very kind of comforting. And so now all of a sudden, this musician, this album, there was like this new memory associated with it, this new idea, this whole new part of my life now forever etched in the grooves of like this album. I know that's really not possible, but just, you know, bear with me. And so, yeah, like now all of a sudden, like the familiarity of the lyrics, the familiarity of the album, I used it to try and make me feel better in this very, very dark time, and in this time where things suddenly weren't going well. And for obvious reasons and not so obvious reasons that I didn't realize had happened to me until way, way later. And I remember, like, the year before, like the semester before Columbine happened, like I said, I was on this really big high. Like I was gearing up to be an actor. I was invited to audition for Juilliard, and everything was great. And then, you know, your world just comes crashing down. And as a result, like I ended up at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, which, for those of you who've never been to Greeley, the whole town, and this isn't like trying to cast dispersion on Greeley, but the whole town smells like cow shit. And that's because the whole town, there's a college in the middle of damn near all the cow farming that occurs in Colorado. And I was a horrible student at Greeley. I didn't go. And as a result, I was put on academic probation. And I didn't go because I wasn't ready. I wasn't mature enough. I still did not understand what was happening to me and how I was changing, and how the events of that day had changed me. And I made a lot of excuses, and I also made a lot of people believe that I was better than I was, like I was better off than I was. But I wasn't. And one of the constants through all of that, one of the things that I kept kind of relying on, or that I kept kind of going back to, was music. And Alanis Morissette's music, especially that second album, was critical in kind of giving me a totem, to use an Inception reference, but in giving me a totem to latch onto, to let me know where I was. And so I got like, well, I got kicked out. I got kicked out of UNC, and I went back home, and I spent that summer kind of dicking around where my mom worked, which was a very small agency in Colorado. And I remember just kind of seeing some things that they were making, and honestly thinking to myself, like, these aren't very good. This is work that I could do. And so, long story short, like, I ended up making a portfolio. I'd rent computer time at a Kinko's because our computer at home wasn't fast enough to run Photoshop. And so I would rent Photoshop and rent a computer at Kinko's, and I would put on Alanis Morissette, and I'd put on some other stuff that I had downloaded. This was very early on in the ripping stages of like MP3s and stuff. And so I'd ripped a bunch of MP3s, and I would listen to Alanis and a couple other bands. And I noticed that when her music would come on, it was like inspiration on demand. Like it just clicked with me, and I could create very freely. And it was remarkable. And in the span of a couple of days, I think I created a portfolio that enabled me to get away from Colorado and attempt to try and fix myself, or fix whatever I thought was wrong with me. And so, yeah, I moved to California. And around this time, I think it was her third, maybe even her fourth album, Under Rugs Swept, came out. And Under Rugs Swept was perfect, because here I was, and it's an album where she's talking about, you know, leaving things behind, or, you know, sweeping things under the rug, or forgiveness and stuff. And I'm like, new chapter, you know, so on and so forth. And I mean, when I say new chapter, I mean new chapter. Like, I moved to California. I didn't tell anybody where I was, who I was, you know, what had happened to me. You know, I told people for the longest time that I lived in, you know, Omaha, Nebraska, because that's where I was born, you know, and that's where I was raised. And I just glossed over Colorado completely. And so, you know, art school is going pretty well, and I'm 4 or 5 semesters into it, and I have a free elective, and I take a screenwriting class, which is taught by, you know, Michael Gottlieb. And he and I, we've talked about Michael, you know, before. And for those of you that don't know, Michael was the writer-director of the 80s pop culture hit film, you know, Mannequin. One of the assignments, or the goals of the class, was to, you know, write a feature-length screenplay by the end of the 12 or 16 weeks semester. And I will admit, I was coming right up against the deadline. I probably had about 4 or 5 weeks to go, and I was at a loss. I was at a complete loss. And so I put in Alanis Morissette, thinking like anything to jog my creativity. This has worked in the past. And sure enough, like that, it just came to me. And so, like, I'm not a superstitious person in real life. Like, I don't consider myself to be very superstitious, but creatively, when it comes to creative endeavors in my life, like I guess I am very, very superstitious at this point, because this is now the second or third time in my life where I've needed inspiration, and I've drawn it from this woman's lyrics. And this was also the time that I got into vinyl, because there were records in the house when I was a kid, but I was very much into CDs, like very much into CDs. And so, you know, it wasn't until college, and honestly, the person that I was with at the time, dating, you know, she was very into old vintage stuff. So we had this old beat to crap Techniques turntable, and I was at Amoeba Records on Sunset in Los Angeles, Hollywood, and they had just released was supposed Former Infatuation Junkie on like some ridiculously high-end vinyl pressing. And I bought it, and I remember it was really expensive. It was very expensive. I think it was one of those like $50 records, but I bought it. And I remember playing that and writing what would become my first screenplay. Like, I'd written like plays before, I'd written scenes and stuff like that, but never like a screenplay, like a film, movie, you know, screenplay. And that was Shimmer. And I spent the next, I think, semester kind of honing it and tuning it. And all the while, like, there's Alanis, you know, giving me insights, giving me moments, things to, you know, navigate and stuff. And Michael was there too. And together, like, we came to this story. And I was given the opportunity to film it. and on a very like micro budget. No one saw it. Like people outside of the crew and a couple of film festival goers. Like no one saw it. But it was that kick, that punch of creative adrenaline that really fueled, like, I think I know what I'm supposed to do with my life now. Like, it almost as if Shimmer helped me close that door about the world that was trying to define me by something else. And now I have this new identity and I've built it for myself. And I felt really, really good about that. And, advertising and the design stuff that I was doing at college was going very well as well. And so, I graduate and I'm out there in the world and creatively and excelling and stuff. But I always knew that I wanted to write, but because advertising kind of took so much of my time and so much of my energy, and you did enjoy it. I did enjoy it a lot. I didn't write or make another movie for a number of years. It was like 3 or 4 years between Shimmer and my next project. One night I'm in my listening room in California and I'm listening to music and I go and I'm going through old stuff and I find the old CDs of Alanis Morissette and I put them on and I grab my laptop and I just write a sentence. I write one sentence and then I write another one and then another one and then another one. And before I know it, like 4 days has gone by and I've written 130 pages of what would become my next film. And I sent it to a bunch of people and they all were like, holy crap, like this is really intense stuff. This is great. We don't know what the commercial viability is of it, because it was a film that dealt with, what I went through at Columbine and in a very personal way. And it told anecdotal stories that I had witnessed. And so, Michael was like, hey, the only way that this is going to happen is if, you do it. And so I was really frustrated because I was getting meetings, like I was getting interviews and meetings and having discussions with, movie people. But the answer was all the same. Like, if you walk away from the project, we'll let someone else do it. But we also understand that if we let someone else do it, the marketability of it goes away. And it just turned into this whole like catch-22 as things in Hollywood do. And so frustrated one night, I'm listening again to music and I just go, screw it. So I put an ad out on Craigslist looking for help. And that's how I met my producing partner, Jenna. And over the course of a few days of, making that contact, like I would act out and like tell her about the story and I would send her music. I kept sending her like all this Alanis Morissette music. And I'm like, oh, it's going to look like this and it's going to be like this. Until finally she's like, I'm in. I get it. I get the movie you're trying to make. I'm in. And so we set off and we ultimately, through hook and crook, we managed to make this thing. And that's a whole other story. But I remember being on set and when I would have a scene that was difficult or something that I was trying to communicate, like I always had my iPod or iPhone on me with this playlist of all the music that I had used and written, or listened to in writing. And most of it was supposed former infatuation junkie. And so that just became this thing, like throughout the film, like everyone that worked on the film knew about the Alanis Morissette connection, knew about like how I was drawing inspiration from her and her music. And then in editing, my editor and I were sitting down and we were editing a very, very poignant scene in the film, one of the biggest scenes in the movie, which had like 1,500 extras in it. And we were just having the hardest time keeping the pace or finding the right pace. And so we roughed in an Alanis Morissette song, the song Not As We, which I know is not on the second album. In fact, I think it was on an EP of hers, but we roughed in the song Not As We, and the whole scene just came came right together. And it was amazing. And we left that song in all of the rough cuts, so that everyone that saw this movie in screener form heard that song, and everyone agreed. And then we went to go license it, and we couldn't afford it. But it was just, not hilarious, but just interesting how this one song came to encapsulate the entire climax of this film, and it was left in, and ultimately, we just couldn't afford it. So we had to switch gears, like literally, I want to say weeks before the film was supposed to, debut at a film festival. So that was really interesting. And then, the film comes out and everything's great, and I'm writing this other film, and I got Alanis Morissette going, and everything's going great. And then, like, my whole world changed, And it changed for a lot of people. This was a time that was very, very trying. And suddenly, once again, like kind of like what had happened in high school, where I was on this tremendous high and I was associating her music with this high, here comes this crash. And it came like 10 years to the day later. And suddenly, like, all of a sudden I'm angry, and her music isn't bringing me solace anymore. It's reminding me of what I've lost. And so I'm losing my house, I'm losing my cars, I'm losing my career, and the ad agency's closing, and just because the financial collapse cost everybody everything. Like, people weren't going to the movies, so you don't need movie posters. Well, if they're not going to the movies, you don't need new movies, and the only movies people are making are big budget movies, because there's only so much entertainment dollar to go around. And so little independents like what I made just weren't getting made. And so I literally, like, everything overnight just kind of went away. And I don't think I listened to Alanis Morissette again for probably 5 years. Like, I still had all of her albums in my collection, but I don't think I put her on after that. And so fast forward from there, I've left LA, like, all the opportunities dried up. I need a change, and I'm living in Nashville, and I get sick. Like, they think that I might have, like, cancer or something, and it didn't turn out to be that, but it put me down for the count, and I become addicted to painkillers and medicating with alcohol, painkillers, and just abusing myself and my relationship and my marriage, and just not being a good person. And I remember one night I was by myself upstairs in my listening room, and just having a really, really, really tough time. And I found that record, from college in my collection, supposed former infatuation junkie, and I found the MTV Unplugged album, and I put them on, and I rode the whole roller coaster. Like, seriously, I went from, like, F you and this is the worst, to suddenly it reminded me of the beautiful things that I was capable of creating, and the beautiful things that I had been a part of, and how badly I wanted to go back to that, and how badly I wasn't ready to give that up, and that I needed to make amends, I needed to come clean, I needed to do a lot of repair work. And in that respect, I think finally the messaging of this second album kind of caught up with me. And, being, early 30s at that point, it'd been a ride. This evening of music kind of gave me this hope. And so I did what I could to kind of fix and right the ship, if you will. And some of it I was able to do, and some of it I wasn't. My marriage did end, and for the better, honestly. It was the right thing, and it it didn't cause me any malice, because I felt this new kind of renewed sense of like chapter 2 or maybe chapter 3. Like I had gone through this horrific thing at high school, and then, you know, I built up this career and only to watch it crumble. And now here I am in Austin, Texas, and I'm getting divorced, but it's all good. You know, it's all okay. And I remember like moving into my first apartment and like by myself in like 15 years at that point. I was like 35. I'm clean. I'm not taking drugs. I'm clean. I'm healthy. And I just remember thinking, like, what's next? Like, how do we do this? And I had hooked up like all my AV equipment, and I'm just sitting there, and I put on a record, and I put on MTV Unplugged, Alanis Morissette, and I just remember it being one of the best sounding, happiest, like just awesome experiences I've ever had listening to music, because I was excited. I knew I was capable of more, and that more was coming. And that was empowering. And so, you know, you hear the song King of Pain, her cover of King of Pain, and I'm like, that ain't me now anymore. I'm letting that all go. And in a lot of ways, like the journey that I've been on that has been kind of scored by her music has brought me to today. Here I am, 38, literally just turned 38, and, you know, about to get married, and I find myself in this new family, and I'm ecstatic about it, because I'm able to allow myself to be happy and to be on the receiving end of happiness and good fortune. And it makes it possible for me to appreciate the failure, but also the success. Whereas before, I really took the failure personally. And that's always been a part of my personality. I know that. Like, I know that I shoulder that. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't know how to be as accepting and open and ready for happiness and love that I am now. And there really hasn't been anybody for almost 20 years. If you exclude family, there really hasn't been anybody that has been there for the entire duration of that saga. You know, everyone kind of comes in and comes out. And while I have people that have known me that long, there are large aspects of that story that they weren't a part of, or they weren't privy to, because they have, you know, everyone has their own life. Everyone has their own thing. And so as a result, I share this kind of strange story and lineage with a person that I've never met, that doesn't owe me or know me from a hole in the wall. And yet, no one other person's creative works or creative endeavors have come to not mirror my own, but be a part of mine, like Alanis Morissette's music has. And it's why I probably listen to her music more than anybody now, even at, you know, 38 years old, and her albums, that my favorite albums now being 20 plus years old. But why more than probably any other musician, I consider her to be of the utmost importance to me personally, creatively, emotionally, because her music has always just kind of been there right at the right moment, good and bad. And at the end of it all, it's been a really kind of beautiful ride. And so that's why, yeah, I think that's the power of music. That's the incredible that's the incredible thing about it, is that we make it our own. It morphs with us. It evolves with us, despite being locked in time. You know, when they record it, like it continues to evolve based on how we evolve. And I can't think of another artist that has done as much. And there might be only one or two others in my entire life, but she's number one. She's number one with a bullet, and I'm grateful. And I wish there was a part of me, and I'm not done yet, but there was a part of me that was really hoping that we could have made that work on the film. But who knows, maybe there's another film in me and I'll get that opportunity. But yeah, it's insane. It's incredible. It really is incredible to look back on it all in the journey and realize that through all of it, there's been this one kind of soundtrack or musical genre or force, artist behind it all. And so, yeah, that's my history in vinyl with Alanis Morissette.